Hello, it's March 23rd, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this week's New Paradigm for Mankind. My name is Megan Beets, and I'm joined today in the studio by Ben Deniston, and we're joined via Google Hangout from Houston, Texas by Kesha Rogers. So just to say a few things, I actually wanted to start by reading something that Mr. LaRouche said on Monday in his discussion with the LaRouche PAC Policy Committee, which makes the stark point of the context that we're all operating in. He said, "The United States, the transatlantic community are finished. Essentially, I would say as of now, what we have called the transatlantic community is actually going to crash totally very soon. It's already doing it. So that's the problem we have to face. You look at everything we see in terms of government and so forth in the United States today, it's all trash. They can't do anything but make mistakes, terrible mistakes. And therefore, what's happened is that Russia and China have now become the leading nations on the planet. That doesn't mean they're going to rule, but it means that right now they are shaping the thing. And the point is, the transatlantic community idea is over. It will never come back again. Never. It was too rotten. It stinks too badly for anyone to want to invite it back to the party again." And we see this here in the United States. We see this in the rising death rates across all segments of the population, young, old, rich, poor. We see that both, for example, in the atrocious healthcare situation, which has been accelerated under Obama with the rationing of healthcare to accelerate the death rate of the population. We also see it in what's come out in the rising suicide rates across all segments of the population, suicide by drug overdoses, suicide by alcoholism, and other means. And this is occurring to what was formerly the most productive segment of the population, the people that actually contributed to the progress of the United States as a whole, whose role has now been taken away under this dying transatlantic system. Now, we also see this in the recent announcements by the head of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, that the EU is now going into negative interest rates, negative lending rates to banks. There's a discussion of helicopter money, printing press money to flood the system. This financial system is dead. It's over. It's irreversibly bankrupt. So that's the transatlantic. But if we look elsewhere in the world, if we look to Russia and what Putin's been doing in the Middle East and elsewhere, and especially if we look to China and their allies, we see a devotion to the kinds of policies for progress that are necessary for the future of mankind. We see it especially in China's space program, which I'm sure we'll discuss some today. And Kesha, you made the point in the editorial that you wrote for the recent EIR, the March 18th issue of EIR, that therefore the United States has a choice to make. Are we going to go down with this collapsed system? Are we going to go down with Obama? Or are we going to join in collaboration with the Eurasian nations for a new future for mankind, a new system premised upon a real collaboration around the space program? So I think that's really the issue we're here to discuss. Now, one more thing I wanted to add is that today, March 23rd, is the 33rd anniversary of Ronald Reagan's announcement of Lyndon LaRouche's policy, the Strategic Defense Initiative, which, as LaRouche and Reagan and their allies envisioned, was to be a program for international collaboration around making new breakthroughs of new physical principles that would make nuclear war, that would end the threat of nuclear war, make, as Reagan said, make the threat of nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. And that was envisioned as a revival and continuation of what was the real spirit and outlook of the Apollo program, collaboration to move mankind into a new future. And I think that just typifies the kind of collaboration that we have to engage in today around the common aims of mankind as a whole. So with that, turn it over to Kesha. I know you have some things to say.
Sure. I think that just looking at where we stand today from the standpoint of the degeneracy in the culture and the fact that the sense of optimism has really been ripped from the population. And when you talked about the collapse of the transatlantic system and what we're seeing today as a result of the bankruptcy and the continued attack on real creativity and real science, that was really the basis of what President John F. Kennedy set into motion. And I think that, you know, we can look at where we are today from a clinical standpoint, the significance of the fact that today is the anniversary of the 33rd anniversary of the Strategic Defense Initiative of Mr. LaRouche's policy. But what did that really represent as a continuation of the vision of President John F. Kennedy? Because the intention of that policy was what President John F. Kennedy had set in place from the standpoint that we had a mission for mankind to come together for the common interest of mankind. It wasn't just to set foot on the moon and to land a man on the moon and then that be it. But think about what President Kennedy had introduced from the standpoint and understood as we had to actually create new frontiers of scientific development. And he talked about putting forth satellites, nuclear power. A lot of people don't even remember that this was the vision of Kennedy, that we had to actually go much further with our investigation into the moon, and then to make breakthroughs, these breakthroughs and new frontiers in scientific development that was going to actually change the paradigm and change the direction from what was being seen prior to at which you had with Truman, the collapse and the attack on the FDR policy. Now, the same thing actually took place later with the policy of attack against LaRouche, Mr. LaRouche, and what he had gotten President Reagan to adopt with the Strategic Defense Initiative. And you look at this clinically from the standpoint of what we're seeing today with the insanity of the Bush-Obama policies to continue to put a nail in the coffin on the real economy, on the nation, to drive the entire nation to utter collapse and to represent the imperial policy that goes against what our nation was founded on, the identity which was put forth with a sense that we had a mission to fulfill, and that was our destiny, especially under President Kennedy. And one of the things I'll just make note of right now is that you're seeing how much this has completely demoralized a society. You know, you have a society that has actually committed itself to death, a culture of death that is killing themselves, a culture that doesn't see that they have a future that they can actually define. But why has this come along? Well, it's been since the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and since the gelling of Mr. LaRouche and the shutdown of the Apollo mission and the shutdown of what the continuation of that through the Strategic Defense Initiative has represented. Now you're seeing the effects of that long term, the future, that you have a situation where I'll just say that I went to this conference, and I've been at this conference that's titled the Lunar and Planetary Science Conference and 47th Lunar and Planetary Science Conference. So from what I understand, these conferences are held every year. So this shows you that the conference has been taking place focusing on lunar planetary exploration for, really since the Apollo mission. And a lot of the people at the conference were crucial and key in the development of the Apollo mission. There were many young people there. But one of the things is that it was heavily focused on lunar, the moon. And what struck me about it is that obviously since the shutdown of the Constellation program by Obama, Obama's attacks on the space program, on the moon, the policy of going back to the moon, that policy has been eliminated. Now, what kind of mission or what kind of vision do these people have? And so you had a sense of real demoralization and hopelessness that had set in, or people were really angry about the fact that they've worked all of their life on the conception that we had an obligation, the mission to return to the moon, but it got deeper than that. I think also the fact of the matter is people are recognizing that it's our obligation to, and as a scientific community, to actually give people a sense of what is it that we're actually contributing to the further progress of humanity. And so one of the things that came up, and we can discuss this more, is the fact that in 2008, 2009, as a part of the coming out of the Constellation program, prior to the Constellation being shut down by Obama, you had what was called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter that was put in place to orbit the moon, to actually show a direction with the intention of possibly organizing getting back to the moon, but that was actually shut down. That mission was shut down by Obama. But the key thing right now is that what's missing in the discussion is a fight not just over whether or not somebody thinks we should get back to the moon or that's important to them or not. That's not the fight. The real fight is that there has been a loss in the identity in the United States of that we're acting for a mission for all of mankind. We have lost a sense of a national, international mission, and that's what people understand and started to really pick up on as I was making certain interventions into the discussions about what China is doing. And China is not just going to investigate the far side of the moon and actually organizing around a moon mission because it is just something to do. But what they're doing is they're actually identifying a new direction, a new paradigm for mankind, and saying this is going to benefit the future existence of man's identity and mission in space. And everybody knows that obviously the moon is the first place for the launching pad for cislunar space. The discoveries that are being made there, that will be made there, are going to benefit all of mankind. And that we have to actually get a sense in the United States that the targeting of the space program by this president is completely unacceptable. He should have and must still be removed now. And the reality is we have to get people within the scientific community, as I've continued to state, to actually stand up and fight, because this is what's at stake.
I think that the key issue is raising it to that level of discussion. I think some of the silliness that still comes around is debating, do we want this program or that program, but I think, I think the role you've played, Kesha, is really critical in bringing out that higher identity, that deeper, real American spirit that you were discussing that's been largely lost, like you said, post-Kennedy, post-Reagan, the attacks on Lynn, and then just the insanity of the Bush and then Obama period. It really takes a certain quality of leadership to pull out that real American spirit. And it's not about America per se, it's about mankind. It's about having some sense that there's something unique about mankind. There's something unique about the human species that distinguishes our species from other forms of life on this planet, and that there's a certain actual immortality in a real sense, in a scientific sense, in the ability of the human species to continue to create higher levels of existence for itself, to continue to create better futures. And at this point in history, we're looking at space, we're looking at the solar system, we're looking at the galaxy, and I think the level of crisis we're facing, I think there's a certain real important brilliance in Mr. LaRouche's choice recently to refocus on the space program, because you're not going to solve this crisis by just getting rid of Obama. You're going to stop yourself from dying. That's good. You don't want to die. We don't want to have mass murder. So you get rid of Obama, you get rid of the British Empire, you get rid of this transatlantic system. But that's not in itself going to save civilization. It requires this new paradigm. It requires this conception of mankind as a unique creative force in the solar system, that we're not limited to Earth, we're not bounded to Earth. And this is something, the Apollo astronauts, reflected upon, coming back, traveling around the world and hearing all these people come up to them in completely different countries saying, we did this. Not you did this, not America did this, we did this as mankind. And that was something that, some of these Apollo astronauts have said was like a lightning bolt realization of just what they'd accomplished and what it was really about. It was not about, just one nation or another nation. It was about demonstrating something unique about the human species. And now that is what China is doing. China's leading the way in that. It doesn't take a genius at this point to see where the action is in the world. China is up front and leading. So I think, our role, your role in particular in the Houston area, and, with your relationship and your history with NASA and fighting for NASA, this is critical right now to bring a real sense of, not just optimism just for the sake of optimism, but real, truthful, valid orientations to the future that give people a reference point to actually fight for. If we're not introducing that element, we're not going to make it through the current breakdown process. We have to come through this by going to a higher level. And I think, what you're describing about intervening at this conference, that's exactly what we need to be doing. And this is what, our supporters, our activists, our organization needs to be doing, is going out and displaying this quality of leadership. Because if you haven't noticed, it's not there otherwise.
Right.
I live in the D.C. area. Leadership is not there.
Yeah. So when you were just quickly, I had just reread this week Kraft Erica's essay, "The Extraterrestrial Imperative," and right at the beginning he says, the way to solve problems, the kind of problems you're bringing, the way to solve problems is to forge concepts which permit one to look beyond the problems. Mm-hmm. Which I think is just a beautiful way of thinking about that you actually have to put your stake in something which is beyond the current system, which is ahead of the current system, which is only something that mankind can do.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting at this conference, just the fact that there is this urge and eagerness for this human identity, that people know that this is what they got involved in the work around the space program. It's not just about people's pet peeves, science, as though they're actually presenting high school science experiments to show off or something, but they know that what these scientific breakthroughs represent are a contribution to further advance and change all mankind. And this actually came up by one of the scientists who was at the conference, who was saying, NASA has a responsibility to work with other nations. It has a responsibility to recognize itself as not just a U.S. internal operation that's making some scientific experiments on the side, but what we do is going to benefit and affect the progress of all mankind, and scientific discoveries that are made by other nations are not just going to benefit those nations, but they're going to benefit the existence of our nation. As the example that one of the scientists used in remembrance of the Apollo mission, and when Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon and said it was one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. But that giant leap, everybody knew, had to continue. That the breakthrough and the optimism that was achieved with that was not to end there. It was to move forward. And so, you think about the threat that we're faced with right now by the threat to the existence of mankind, and that threat coming from a British imperial system, a collapsing transatlantic system, as you said before, Megan, a collapsing Wall Street system that has to be brought down. And you think about how far away we've gone away from President John F. Kennedy's vision, and when the threat of war, as we're seeing today, where nations are being pitted against each other instead of actually fighting to achieve the common aims of mankind. And people should go back and really reflect and look at President John F. Kennedy's first inaugural address, where he's taking on the threat that was posed against the powers of the United States and the Soviet Union or Russia. But this actually stands today, where people have to say, let's put our differences aside, as John F. Kennedy did. We have a mission for mankind, and his remarks were let both sides seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. Together, let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap the ocean depths, and encourage the arts and commerce. And let both sides unite to heed all corners of the earth the command of Isaiah to undo the heavy burdens and let the oppressed go free. And how do you do this? How do you free people? Well, you free people from the standpoint of giving them a sense of human identity, that we have a mission as human beings to discover what man's role in coming to know better who we are as human beings. And the best way to do that is to go out into space, to go out and to come to know what's out there, what we can actually learn and discover, and to actually explore the universe. And so we have a mission in the galaxy, and that mission is being stifled right now. It's being stifled by war, it's being stifled by economic collapse, and being stifled by Obama. So all those things that President Kennedy put forward, the way you're going to eradicate the drug disease and green the deserts and so forth, is by going out and investigating the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it really gets right to the core principle of economics, which is also the core principle of what makes us unique as a species, which is the essential, central driving role of the creative human mind. And you talk about getting out there and exploring. When we do that, when we're engaged in that process of making achievements, of accomplishing new things in space, that transforms mankind. We're not the same species we were before. The kinds of discoveries and breakthroughs that have to be made are things that we, in almost every case, never quite anticipated, and give mankind powers to make new original creations. For example, new metal alloys not only had to be created to get us into space, new metal alloys could be created in space, in the zero-gravity environment that are pretty much impossible to create on Earth, that would let us do things that we just simply couldn't achieve before. Medical breakthroughs. Medicines could be manufactured in space, in zero gravity, that can't be manufactured on Earth, practically. And these things completely transform man itself. And I think, if the population can remember the kind of optimism that comes from that kind of transformation and increase in the powers of man in and over the universe, and remember who we are as a creative force, then you're really starting to tap into the meaning of the space program.
And I think the thing a lot of people just still don't get is it's necessary. It's not just nice, it's necessary. And I mean, I think Mr. LaRouche brought this up again on Monday, and I think this issue of these, and we mentioned it, these accelerating death rates. I mean, this is something really to think about. That this isn't just something somebody did. This is a mass social phenomenon, and you have again, people in their middle ages, people that should be in their prime contribution to society, their prime age, working age population. It's also in the younger generation as well, but it's also in this people in their middle ages, people should be on the peak of their careers, and to have these people just dying because of worthlessness. They drink themselves to death. They take prescription drugs. They if not direct suicide itself. You just reflect on that for a second. All right? I mean, things are bad in the United States, but these people's physical living conditions aren't as bad as many places around the world. You can go to many places of the world and people are living out their lives and working and fighting to create a family, grow, have a contribution in much worse conditions. So it's not the objective conditions themselves, but it's this hopelessness. It's this complete lack of a connection to any meaning in society, any meaning in their lives. That why else would you have this dramatic, unprecedented, at least in American history, acceleration in this death rate issue? It is I think a dramatic expression of a disease in all of society, and I think what it says is that this is necessary. It's necessary to create something new. If your society is not participating in creating something new, something that hasn't been created before, what's the point? What's the purpose? Apes live one generation to the next the same. And that's what animals do. The thing that makes mankind unique is one generation can be fundamentally different. And that fundamental difference comes from the creative contributions of the prior generation. Really of individuals in the prior generation. And then, shared through a social process. That's what makes us human. That's what we are. And if you don't have that as an active, constant presence in society, your society is not going to make it. And I think we're seeing that very clearly. So, it's not, the issue is not, it's not the way people tend to think about these things. Like, oh, the space program, yeah, it'll be nice, it makes people excited, but, can we afford it? Let's deal with practical things first. No, that people don't get it. This is a requirement for mankind's existence. The progress is a requirement for existence for mankind. And that's a law. That's so we have a fight right now to get this thing back up and running, to get the space program up, running, and going again. And China is the place we want to orient to. They're leading the way. This is no secret. I mean, I know people get there's probably a lot of people watching this of various, backgrounds and do various things. A lot of the general population gets, a lot of propaganda about, China this, China that. Anybody who's serious knows China is where things are going on. Education, science, development, investment in new technologies. The space program is kind of, infrastructure, nuclear power, rail. I mean, you can go on and on and on. Water development. The space program is kind of, typifying it. But anybody who's involved in any of these things, I mean, we're getting this all over, universities. Kesha, you're saying, this is clear in your discussions down at this conference. I mean, anybody who's serious knows this is where things are going on. And if we want a future, if we want to actually be human, these are our allies. They're not attacking us. We have an insane person in the White House following the orders of a dying imperial system that views them as a threat. That's the problem. we have an ally there that we should be working with. And yeah, space is the place to do it.
Yeah, and I think this question that Mr. LaRouche continues to get back to, as far as the commitment and the understanding of mankind and human beings and Americans, that we have an obligation to actually acting for the future, and that's what's being taken away. Why are we making these new discoveries? Why are we making these breakthroughs? We're not making the breakthroughs so that somebody today or in the time of the breakthrough can feel comfortable or can say that something is happening that's going to improve their immediate conditions in their immediate life. Like some people say, well, what is that going to do for me? How is that going to do something for me right now? This is the backwards thinking in terms of economics, because the method of LaRouche's economics has been to actually drive an advancement for the progress that's going to actually impact future generations that haven't even been born yet. And so you think about it from the standpoint of the destruction on society today and the continued destruction that people are thinking about the individual, me. What am I going to get out of this? How am I going to actually survive myself? And there is no conception and no commitment to what is it that we're actually doing to better and further the progress of future generations. And you've lost that in society. And so now you have a situation where you look at the conditions of the young people in society. They have come out of a generation and they're continuing to be told, well, you're just on your own. You're going to have to deal with this collapsing society and this mess. We don't have to deal with it. And this is the older generation to the younger generation. But the key thing is that so we've lost this identity where the commitment to those not yet born to identify a future for them, as the grandparents used to say to the grandchildren, I built this for you. Or people who didn't even get a chance to meet the next generations, who may have died beforehand, had a sense that they were leaving something behind that was going to, as I said, better the progress. So that's what we have to get back to. That's the identity that has to be restored in a mission for mankind that would be exemplified through the space program, as a key component of that.
Just to throw it in there, I think one phenomenon, especially among the younger generations, which is a very evil sort of surrogate for the real sense of dedication to the future you're talking about, is this green paradigm. I mean, you hear the rhetoric all the time that we have to think about future generations and we have to think about our grandchildren and making sure we leave a clean earth for them and making sure we don't use all the resources and so forth. But that's just a total lie. I mean, Ben, you said it. Mankind's survival is progress. Mm-hmm. That was always recognized until you got to the middle of this corrupt 20th century. That it was clear progress, advancement is how you perpetuate the human species, not the intentional devolution.
I mean, it's an insane cult at this point.
Yeah.
The irony is that life, even outside of human life, is not sustainable. You look at the evolutionary record. Nothing in the development of life has any orientation towards sustainability, maintaining some state, maintaining some fixed state, some carrying capacity. It's always been progressive, improving, creative. And these guys are just nuts. I mean, but I think to bring it around, I think this lunar mission really is the frontier, and it's very interesting to see China's some of their concluding elements of their lunar exploration program are going to be focused on the lunar far side, the far side of the moon. And if people don't know, we always see the same side of the moon. it's a funny relationship we have with the moon there. You know, it's always maybe it always wants to be looking at us for some reason. I don't know, it's interested or watching or something. But the same side of the moon is always facing the Earth. So there's an entire side of the moon that we never see unless we go up there and land there, send spacecraft there, or orbiters or what have you. And China now is focused on landing on this far side of the moon. Mankind's never done that before. They're going to send a robotic mission. They want to send a lander to go to the far side of the moon and land there and start to do some preliminary scientific investigations, which would be something that's never happened before. And on the far side, there's stuff there you can do. You can't do anywhere on Earth. You can't do anywhere on Earth orbit. You actually have entire ranges of the of light, of the electromagnetic spectrum, certain very low frequencies in the radio range, which we could be viewing the universe in. Every time we go out and look with different wavelengths, looking in optical versus infrared versus ultraviolet versus X-ray or something, people see these images of looking at the universe in different wavelengths, and we always discover new things we weren't looking for. We haven't even completed that process yet. There's a whole range in the low range, which it's incredibly noisy. The Earth's system itself generates a lot of noise. So it's like trying to, observe Jupiter in the daytime with the sun out.
Or like trying to hear somebody whisper from across a really noisy room.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. There's just too much noise. But you go to the lunar far side, you're shielded from all that. So we actually have one of the quietest places, darkest places in the radio, in this low frequency radio range, available to us. That could actually open up an entire new window to the universe. And there's all kinds of things that we could see, that we could discover about the galaxy, about the sun, about our solar system, about the organization of our galaxy and other galactic systems. That could be the basis of complete new breakthroughs in science. Are we doing that? No, China's doing that. There's people here that want to do that. Plenty of scientists and young people and engineers that want to go to the lunar far side, that know that's going to be a key breakthrough for providing mankind completely new insights about the universe. But who's actually doing it? China. They're doing it. They're going to go land there. And then there's a lot of other interesting things too, certain unique geological features on the far side. But the point is that's, if you want to set ourselves up for the next leaps in science, to provide us with the best observational capabilities to understand what are the new discoveries yet to be made in the universe, then we need to go. You got to go to the lunar far side. You're not going to get that anywhere else. To build these low frequency observation systems, it's going to give us a completely new window into the universe and something that we can't do otherwise. So that's where China's going. So they're looking to the future. And the point is, these are the kinds of things. These typify the kinds of things that facilitate the process of real creative discoveries of fundamental principle. Not just engineering, not just technology, but actually fundamental science. What Kepler did, what Einstein did. That's if you go to the heart of it, that's the substance of the action that really upshifts and enables the transformation of what mankind really is. It's those fundamental discoveries of principle that give the potential for mankind to literally relate with the universe in a completely different way. To this process we're talking about of constantly improving society, you go to the essence of it, it's this creative capability for creative discovery. And so, this lunar far side is a key target in providing the basis for these next leaps, these next scientific frontiers. And there's a lot more we can do, but the moon, getting some permanent presence on the moon, developing the moon, and getting to the lunar far side and exploring the lunar far side, also interrogating the moon, having it tell us what it knows, what its history was, these things are just right there for us as the basis for, complete breakthroughs. And so, we got to get on board on this. We got to go there. The lunar far side is the target right now. Even Europe's talking about it. The European head of the European Space Agency is saying, "Hey, let's do this. Let's go on the moon." Russia's been talking about this for years.
And if you go back in the United States, Harrison Schmitt, and I'm sure he wasn't the only one, but he was pushing for one of the last 3 Apollo missions, the ones that got canceled, to land on the far side of the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons was to begin to explore the unique geology, the unique minerals, the unique features that we could already tell, even just from orbit, existed on the far side of the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And then now, Schmitt and also many others in the United States, including, and then also the Chinese, have pointed to the unique capability we would have on the far side to set up mining operations to mine helium-3.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of, and the Chinese have discussed the mining of helium-3 from the standpoint of powering the Earth, but also from the standpoint of powering man's presence on the moon, powering nuclear propulsion to get us from a lunar base out into deep space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they're committed to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just what you're saying about people in Europe and Russia and here, people are ready to join in on this.
Mm-hmm. And then we got our insane president there looking for asteroids to go jump onto. The whole world is orienting this direction. We got this, total joke of a program as part of the destruction of NASA, just on this crazy wild goose case on this supposed asteroid mission, which is going nowhere. So it's the at the point this guy's got to go. We need to get a shift, and this is where we want to go. This is the next target.
Yeah, so it really requires that there is a change in the identity and the thinking of the American people. And really, you take the scientific leadership, they have to be the start of that change. They have to overcome and rid of this fear that says that they have to go along with these insane policies when they know that it is targeting an attack on real creativity, real science, on a commitment to a driver that's going to, as said, further the progress of mankind. And that people are saying, how are we going to inspire the population? How are we going to bring a sense of optimism back? That was the subject of discussion that came up many times with some of the participants in this conference that I was just at. They know that there is no sense that the role of the scientific community in the United States is to inspire the population with a sense that they're participating in something great. And so now, so they have a responsibility, and that's what we're actually fighting with these scientific leaders, to come together and recognize that we have to define a new direction for the space program, and space program identified with what we could be doing if we were acting to collaborate with China, with Russia. Yes, I know that there is an idiot policy in the Congress that says we can't work with China, so what are we supposed to do? Well, kick the idiot Congress members out that say this. We should, the scientific community has more power and more clout over the idiot Congress members who don't know one single thing about science or about where the direction of mankind should be going. And so, that's a further subject of discussion, but I think this question of the attack on the scientific community, the fear that's been set in, and the fact that you have taken away the ability to really do what we're passionate as human beings about doing, about making discoveries, about being creative. And people are just frustrated by the fact that they have to go through all the bureaucratic insanity, and they have to go along with what's forced upon them, but they shouldn't accept that any longer. And so I think one thing I do want to say is that's going to be the nature of the upcoming conference that's going to be held on April 7th, and that we have to bring the best minds and thinkers within the scientific community, within the international community together to say, let's map out a new course of direction for mankind, as we're seeing with China, with Russia, leading the way right now. And the United States has an obligation and responsibility to join in this effort, because if we don't, it will soon be too late. And either we're going to go down with a collapsing, dying system, or we're going to actually join with that new direction that's in the course that's being set forth for mankind, that's going to actually give new hope, new meaning for people's lives, and actually give people a sense of why they should want to live, and they have a purpose to live and an obligation and a mission to live, because their living is going to continue to bring a new sense of direction, new sense of meaning to those who come after them. So I think we have a big job in front of us, and looking at some of what's we've said here in terms of the demoralization, the people who are taking their lives, what are we doing? And this is the discussion that Mr. LaRouche brought up. We have an obligation to bring a new meaning to why people have to live, and why people have to have a sense of life from the standpoint that we as human beings represent something that no other animal could ever achieve or could ever do. And so that should give us hope and happiness.
I think that's well said.
Okay. Well, it's a good place to leave it. And so, Kesha, thanks for joining us today. And I'd like to thank all of you for watching. Stay tuned to LaRouchePAC.com.
These breakthroughs and new frontiers in scientific development that was going to actually change the paradigm and change the direction from what was being seen prior to at which you had with Truman, the collapse and the attack on the FDR policy. Now, the same thing actually took place later with the policy of attack against LaRouche, Mr. LaRouche, and what he had gotten President Reagan to adopt with the Strategic Defense Initiative. And you look at this clinically from the standpoint of what we're seeing today with the insanity of the Bush-Obama policies to continue to put a nail in the coffin on the real economy, on the nation, to drive the entire nation to utter collapse and to represent the imperial policy that goes against what our nation was founded on, the identity which was put forth with a sense that we had a mission to fulfill, and that was our destiny, especially under President Kennedy. And one of the things I'll just make note of right now is that you're seeing how much this has completely demoralized a society. You have a society that has actually committed itself to death, a culture of death that is killing themselves, a culture that doesn't see.
Hello, it's March 23rd, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this week's New Paradigm for Mankind. My name is Megan Beets, and I'm joined today in the studio by Ben Deniston, and we're joined via Google Hangout from Houston, Texas by Kesha Rogers. So just to say a few things, I actually wanted to start by reading something that Mr. LaRouche said on Monday in his discussion with the LaRouche PAC Policy Committee, which makes the stark point of the context that we're all operating in. He said, "The United States, the transatlantic community are finished. Essentially, I would say as of now, what we have called the transatlantic community is actually going to crash totally very soon. It's already doing it. So that's the problem we have to face. You look at everything we see in terms of government and so forth in the United States today, it's all trash. They can't do anything but make mistakes, terrible mistakes. And therefore, what's happened is that Russia and China have now become the leading nations on the planet. That doesn't mean they're going to rule, but it means that right now they are shaping the thing. And the point is, the transatlantic community idea is over. It will never come back again. Never. It was too rotten. It stinks too badly for anyone to want to invite it back to the party again. And we see this here in the United States. We see this in the rising death rates across all segments of the population, young, old, rich, poor. We see that both, for example, in the atrocious healthcare situation, which has been accelerated under Obama with the rationing of healthcare to accelerate the death rate of the population. We also see it in what's come out in the rising suicide rates across all segments of the population. Suicide by drug overdoses, suicide by alcoholism, and other means. And this is occurring to what was formerly the most productive segment of the population, the people that actually contributed to the progress of the United States as a whole, whose role has now been taken away under this dying transatlantic system. Now, we also see this in the recent announcements by the head of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, that the EU is now going into negative interest rates, negative lending rates to banks. There's a discussion of helicopter money, printing press money to flood the system. This financial system is dead. It's over. It's irreversibly bankrupt. So that's the transatlantic. But if we look elsewhere in the world, if we look to Russia and what Putin's been doing in the Middle East and elsewhere, and especially if we look to China and their allies, we see a devotion to the kinds of policies for progress that are necessary for the future of mankind. We see it especially in China's space program, which I'm sure we'll discuss some today. And Kesha, you made the point in the editorial that you wrote for the recent...
been ripped from the population. And when you talked about the collapse of the transatlantic system and what we're seeing today as a result of the bankruptcy and the continued attack on real creativity and real science, that was really the basis of what President John F. Kennedy set into motion. And I think that we can look at where we are today from a clinical standpoint, the significance of the fact that today is the anniversary of the 33rd anniversary of the Strategic Defense Initiative of Mr. LaRouche's policy. But what did that really represent as a continuation of the vision of President John F. Kennedy? Because the intention of that policy was what President John F. Kennedy had set in place from the standpoint that we had a mission for mankind to come together for the common interest of mankind. It wasn't just to set foot on the moon and to land a man on the moon and then that be it. But think about what President Kennedy had introduced from the standpoint and understood as we had to actually create new frontiers of scientific development. And he talked about putting forth satellites, nuclear power. A lot of people don't even remember that this was the vision of Kennedy, that we had to actually go much further with our investigation into the moon, and then to make
an EIR, the March 18th issue of EIR, that therefore the United States has a choice to make. are we going to go down with this collapsed system? Are we going to go down with Obama? Or are we going to join in collaboration with the Eurasian nations for a new future for mankind, a new system premised upon a real collaboration around the space program? So I think that's really the issue we're here to discuss. Now, one more thing I wanted to add is that today, March 23rd, is the 33rd anniversary of Ronald Reagan's announcement of Lyndon LaRouche's policy, the Strategic Defense Initiative, which, as LaRouche and Reagan and their allies envisioned, was to be a program for international collaboration around making new breakthroughs of new physical principles that would make nuclear war, that would end the threat of nuclear war, make, as Reagan said, make the threat of nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. And that was envisioned as a revival and continuation of what was the real spirit and outlook of the Apollo program, collaboration to move mankind into a new future. And I think that just typifies the kind of collaboration that we have to engage in today around the common aims of mankind as a whole. So with that, turn it over to Kesha. I know you have some things to say.
Sure. I think that just looking at where we stand today from the standpoint of the degeneracy in the culture and the fact that the sense of optimism has really